And we are live. Hi. Hello, everybody. Welcome to,
Hello.
welcome to Palette, a creator showcase and panel talk show. And today we have with us Sahoni, a game designer and a podcaster. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and where we can find you on the internet before we
Okay.
start our interview?
Lucio, I am Sahoni, but also known as Gar Atkins. I am a game designer and podcaster, as aforementioned, and you can usually find me when not on Twitter procrastinating or giving updates. Uh, at Sahoni_stuff. That's SAHONI_stuff. You can catch me on a weekly current events comedy podcast called Barking Points Memo, where I talk about the news and try not to have a breakdown, or at least have it in a funny way. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
for the laughs.
Uh,
uh,
we don't have a budget for canned laughter, but
hmm.
people are laughing in the internet.
Okay, well, thank
With
you,
you.
internet laughter.
With you.
It's fine. I don't hear about it until after the fact anyways. That's what's great about podcasting.
I know. It's lovely.
You don't Podcasting saves you from knowing when you've bombed.
Oh, that's a mood. Okay, so why don't we start off with what got you into RPGs and TTRPGs and gaming?
Oh, okay. So I came at it at a weird angle. I got into making games before I got into playing tabletop games.
Well, that's
Uh,
one way.
yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, obviously, I played a lot of like the stock standard Hasbro stuff, or the Milton Bradley's. You know, your Monopolies, your Candyland, all of those things that are just kind of a part of the American experience. TM.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think, like, as far as getting into games proper, I saw a D&D book once. It was like a 3.5 player's handbook, and I said I could do that. And I went running. The first actual tabletop game I played was in high school, and it was Changeling the Dreaming.
Ooh.
Yeah, which that's a weird one to come in on, I think. If you don't know Changeling the Dreaming, it's
Mm-hmm.
part of the world of darkness, because I am forever an edgy boy. Uh, if it's not apparent, I have like a werewolf shirt on that has like claw marks on the back and says Full Moon
Ooh.
Club. Yeah, forever the edgy
Nice.
boy. It is uh it is specifically like using the idea of changelings and being and fairies as a way to explore uh being othered, specifically a lot of queerness or neurodivergent
Mm-hmm.
stuff, like, and
So
like
changeling is like shape shifting specifically.
not necessarily. You have like ties to specific types of like little folk or fairy from around the world, and it's World of Darkness, so how well they actually do it uh is wildly up to debate. Most of the time not the best. uh, and it's it's something that some parts have aged better than others.
Mm-hmm.
uh but it was it's a far different kind of entry point, I think, than like a D&D,
Yeah.
because you're starting off as talking about feelings.
Yeah. Ooh, thank you, Burst of Hope, Jess, for hosting the stream. Thank
Thank
you.
you. uh
But yeah, so you got into designing before you got into playing games.
uh-huh
So
I don't I don't
let's.
I don't think I took it serious though until another World of Darkness game really got me mad.
Which
Uh,
one?
Werewolf the Apocalypse. Uh,
All right.
I have a complicated history with that one because it's a very important game for me because it was the first time I felt I saw myself be represented at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm Indigenous, and a large part of Werewolf the Apocalypse is it used a lot of the stories and myths of my nation, and it talked about Indigenous issues, and it had Indigenous characters that were visible and talked about these things and said that these are things worth caring about and being angry about. And that game, is more of a metaphor for like activism. And unfortunately, there is a lot of there was a lot of bad stuff that happened around it a few years back, and like I don't want to get into it too deep, but it made me mad. It made me mad to see something like that close to me and using something that's sacred to me, and using it to hurt other people. And I got tired. And suddenly all those things that I was excusing just to feel included became too much. And so I did what the game taught me to, which is I got angry and I did something about it.
And
so I started making games. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about those games.
Okay.
I believe that's no, it's not Exceptionals. Exceptional.
It is.
It is. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is.
Let us talk about Exceptionals then.
Exceptionals is a game largely inspired by X-Men, and the mutant metaphor, which is using the idea of mutation as a stand-in for any number of vectors of marginalization, whether it's queerness or being a person of color or disability, and you or even like religious persecution, and using that vector, this imaginary way to kind of talk about these things and talk about these issues. I wanted to use that, and I made it a game about specifically the spaces and communities that marginalized people make for themselves. And I wanted it to be a game for those spaces too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know it is currently in beta and it's still in works, but what can you tell me about what playing the game would be like?
Well, it's largely a narrative focused game. If you like stuff like if you like things like Fate or City of Mist, I think you'll be very at home here. I very much wanted to kind of divorce it from hard numbers and use more of like a narrative approach to things, because like even in a Superman story, someone like Jimmy Olsen still has a use. He's still narratively important. I want to, and superhero stories have such like a wide variety of power scaling that was a very important thing for me to capture. So you're making a character using a bunch of tags to describe what they're good at, what they have regrets over, what they're bad at, what might, and this is kind of generally split up into two categories. You're defining yourself by both your mutation protocols, which is all your fun superpowers, and then you have persona protocols, which is how you or others define you in a group, like the kind of identities that you wear in a group dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned tags because I've sort of, for the past month or two, I've been working on trying to create a Surzamine game system, essentially, with also my cast members from the Musafirs as well, Ajay and Amr. And I was floating around the idea of tags because I found tags to be an easy way of sort of adding on abilities without having to create mechanics about it.
Exactly. It's a lot more freeing, and I very much wanted to be able to do high concept things. Like I know I have characters that are, you know how like a lot of RPGs have like a main cast that they use
Mm-hmm.
to kind of explore the world in. I have those, and like some of the people I have is I have a guy who has a alternate dimension that has a diner removed from time and space that inside of his eye. And I have like a Filipino SoundCloud rapper that can inverts any liquid she drinks into highly explosive jellyfish.
Wow.
Yeah, I wanted to be able to kind of explore those or give players the ability to do those weird things. I think what's most unique about the game though is that I have two groups of mechanics that kind of tie together that really kind of emphasize all that community stuff. Um, I have bonds, which are it's your relationship with other people, and and I didn't want it to. It is something that kind of ebbs and flows with kind of the drama at the table.
Mm-hmm.
You know how much you're willing to deal with a person on a single day is you know it changes some days.
Yeah, and I think stuff like this also really makes the table have a buy-in and have and be active participants in their story versus reacting in
Sure,
a lot of.
absolutely. And you know, it's not it's there's a lot of mechanics that are attached to it. I wrote a whole book, but it largely boils down to that, like, yeah, you can get what you want in the here and now, uh, and that might be good, but that's if you're screwing someone over to get it, that's gonna bite you in the butt in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, building trust and building that bond and working with people, it's work, but it will benefit you a lot more.
Yeah.
uh, and that's part of it. And the other is I have base building. I call it base building because I didn't want to use the word safe spaces because that's been irony
Mm-hmm.
poisoned.
Oh yeah. It's one
Yeah,
of those things where if you advertise yourself as a safe space, uh yeah, there's I don't want to get into it either in terms of like um no one is 100% safe, and likewise if you go around saying I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe, it's kind of like the nice guy TM thing.
right. Yeah, it's I wanted to make something where you
But I like base
as
building.
yeah, I wanted to make something as the you as a group like build out your community. You build out like the resources it has. Why is it safe? And you know, like what makes you want to go there with it for fun and not just because you have to, or you feel mandated to in some way. Um, and I also wanted you to build out like community members and get really invested in that. And they have their own bonds and you know issues that they might be going through. And I thought that was important. I wanted the the things that you're mandated to have for a base are that it's a place where you are free to be yourself without reservations in some way. And it is a space that your community regularly passes through, and it is there, is present. You know, so you know, no hiding up in the Batcave or Superman's Fortress of Solitude.
Those aren't really bases when with names like Fortress of Solitude. It's meant to
Right.
be a yeah. It's more like a space for someone to retire to, one person,
Yeah,
versus a
it's Superman's Zoo Sims.
Yep. Uh,
uh,
so let's go into a little bit about your podcasting work.
okay.
Tell me about Barking Points.
I actually ended up on that uh as a guest because there was a big it's a furry podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And
What's your persona?
it is a red wolf, Canis rufus. I based it off of a story that I grew up with that was very important to me, and they are the local wolves in the place that my nation comes from. So it just felt fitting,
Would
and
you
I can't see myself as anything else.
would you care to share the story?
That's a long story that would require me to get into like Talagi cosmology 101.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever. It's. I would still love to hear it, but whatever
Yeah.
you're comfortable sharing
Uh,
with us, of course.
I don't, maybe not on air because I'd be like, okay, so there's this place called Gadulangi. And anyways, that's happening. And there's the sun's over here in the darkening place, and it would just be a whole thing.
Okay. So this character, your persona, is something that's very
Mhm.
personal to you.
Yeah,
Tell me what. Yeah.
I kind of view it in the same like a lot of people approach theirs in different ways because like ultimately it's a fandom, and like all fandoms, you get what you put into it.
Mm-hmm.
um I think for a lot of people it has an awareness about the adult side of the fandom that other people do not in their own fans, or like pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
But it had like that, combined with just how queer of a space it is, gave it like a really bad reputation. But I kind of see mine in the same way. You know how like mangaka use little characters to represent them, and
Mm-hmm.
little stories in the back of like a volume. You
Yeah.
know, I can't remember her name, but the mangaka for Full Metal Alchemist, she likes to use like a cow with glasses. I very much like to view my persona in the same way. Like this is my
It's an
little,
avatar.
yeah, it's my little avatar that I use, that I can it kind of interact with these spaces that I created, and as serious or unserious as of a way that I want.
So, Omi the Fool says Hiromu Arakawa. I apologize if I butchered the pronunciation of that.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's the mangaka that you were referring to.
Yes, it sounds about right. uh, but I very much use it in kind of the same way, I guess. Uh,
Yeah, so tell me what Barking Points is about.
Bargaining Points is a panel show uh, where we talk about current events,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but in a fun comedic way, and try not to have a panic attack over it. We try. I think like we as a community try to view it as a way to just kind of talk about different angles or perspectives on something, or help provide tools or outlets for actual useful action, as opposed to just screaming at the sky,
Mm-hmm.
which I know is a popular pastime right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, sometimes that's just to like vent because like everything just feels a little hopeless, doesn't it?
Yeah, it can. I think like I think uh getting active helps with that, though.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up on the podcast because cultural appropriation is a big issue in the fandom.
Yeah.
And I got on there to kind of talk about like what it is, what it looks like, why it matters, how to avoid it, and what happens if you accidentally do a cultural appropriation. How do you react to that?
Yeah.
Uh,
So there are some very like immediate like cultural appropriation, like the headdress and
Mm-hmm.
certain things. Is there a particular cultural appropriation that is not as well known but can get as insidious or as sort of
Uh,
bad, I guess?
okay, so a lot of what defines indigenous existence
Mm-hmm.
is invisibility, as opposed to like the hyper visibility that you might see uh, other ethnicities deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I know there a lot of the time when I talk about like what cultural appropriation is and looks like and indigenous cultures, I have to start with just about everything you know about Native Americans is wrong. A lot of it is a construct of what's called the Hollywood Indian.
Yeah.
Uh, it is what you are shown. It is a narrative that we've had very little kind of say in how it's been constructed and made, and uh, what that looks like, or and it's not only uh, the feather headdress or mistreating sacred objects. Uh, it can be things like where we are not all a homogenous group.
Oh, for
there
sure.
are there's like 597 recognized indigenous cultures in the US alone. uh it's so all of these different people have their own histories, their own cultures, their own uh issues that they have dealt with.
Yeah.
And sometimes uh it's just a matter of getting people to recognize that and do the work.
Yeah, like, of course, like, I don't think I can ever imagine what it's like for
Hmm.
you, but I sort of have a very little overlap in that in terms of when working with Surzamine and everything, that trying to break this homogenous idea of what the Indian subcontinent is.
Right.
Yeah, like, and on top of that, I don't like using the Indian subcontinent because everybody defaults to India, and the thing is that in India is only a very small portion of what modern day India is.
Hmm.
There's Pakistan, there's Bangladesh, there's Nepal, there is Sri Lanka, there is all these places that form this big kaleidoscope that I could spend years talking about. But yeah, like, I get like 597, you said, or
last time I checked, the number fluctuates.
yeah, so almost 600
Yeah,
cultures
and that's
within the North America alone. That's
US. Just
US.
US.
Oh, just US. Oh my, that's even smaller. Like,
Yeah.
within that alone, that
and
is
and that being recognized by the US is not like the only metric of indigeneity.
yeah.
So there's a lot of cultures that are still fighting for like federal recognition.
And like, even within Canada, First Nations and all the indigenous populations, that's huge. I don't even know how many there are, and I should.
Hmm. I know it because it's a nice metric to
Mm.
throw out to kind of like shock people into kind of the mindset they need to be in, which is, oh, I don't know anything. I think personally, back to the question personally, like the thing that I get most annoyed at is people who use sacred figures or beings or that have cultural taboos around them very flippantly, uh,
Yeah.
or uh, they refer to them as cryptids. I hate that one.
Oh, I actually don't know where cryptids come from or what the origin of cryptids are. So I'm interested. What do you think is a better term then?
Okay, so I think like it's not fair to call something that's part of a living existent culture a cryptid, because the language that we use is matters, and it's kind of like a very flippant, dismissive way to talk about something like
Mm-hmm.
this. It undermines things.
Yeah.
And so I like talking about it in terms of actually saying figures or beings or mythology or folklore is is better, I think, than mythology, because folklore has it implies more than just stories. It
Mm-hmm.
is living folk ways. But this is something that like other natives will argue about a lot, because it is trying to parse our cultures into academic language.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially like academic language from an outsider.
Yeah.
Uh,
So, there's actually a question in chat from Acadian Rhythm, aka
sure.
Carl. Hi, Carl, who's sitting 5 feet away from me. If someone wants to learn more about Native cultures, I shouldn't be
Mhm.
laughing while I say that. It's just, if someone wants to learn more about Native cultures, is there a good online resource that's accurate?
Um, I guess that really is going to depend on what you want to know. I think there's the always the best place to go is the cultures in question's government websites,
Mm-hmm.
because most indigenous cultures have a government website in some form, even if it's just like a Facebook page. They will have things, and they will talk about things going on in their communities and events and politics, and they and all these little things. Uh, First person source is always the best.
Yeah.
Uh, After that, again, it just kind of like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for indigenous film history? Are you looking for?
Were you the one who compiled a list of media? Because I felt like.
Yeah, that was me. I did like an entire like indigenous film history syllabus that is accurate-ish up to about 4 years ago.
Yeah, I need, like, I would love to share that list if that's something that's open to public.
Sure, I
If you
can
could,
I can send it to you later. Yeah,
yeah, or if you're on our Twitch chat, if you want to link it in chat, that would also, uh,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, that I had gone through that list. I think when you had shared it, and it was really eye opening for me. And was definitely something I had bookmarked to later watch. It's one of those things where I definitely want to go revisit that list and go through all the movies and
Mhm.
media you had put on it because it was really, really good. But let's now maybe talk about another podcast that you're in,
Mhm.
which is RPG Pal Club. Can you tell me a
Yes.
little bit about that?
I RPG Palette Club is it's it started as a D&D podcast, so we're currently in limbo, like a lot of D&D podcasts.
Yeah. Uh, I
uh,
know a lot have switched to Quest or have switched to other systems. Are you in
um,
limbo because you're still working on the system, or are you in limbo?
I think it's a combination of figuring out like what sort of system we want to do, and it is a well-meaning podcast, and I think the person who runs it is doing the rest. I don't know if they necessarily get why D&D is in hot water. Uh, I know, hot gossip.
Yes,
Um,
it's
but we've been. It was always founded with the idea that it was something that we could play all sorts of different games on.
mm-hmm.
Recently we did a wild one shot where the conceit was TV executives figured that writers and actors were too expensive, so they built giant robots to run like television show algorithms, but they all became self-aware. and we all played like different characters from the different television shows. I played Sabretooth Sam, who's a real groovy cat that loves to jam, and he is from a Hanna-Barbera like
Oh, that.
mystery solving teen show. But he's also just he's voiced by Paul Lind, so I was just doing a Paul Lind impression the whole time.
Nice.
And just being very catty. Haha.
Yes. We. I know a lot about cats and cattiness. Last
Yeah.
night we had a cats and criminals game, which was a lot of fun. But cats.
Oh, I'm sorry I missed that. That
Well,
seems
we have
fun.
VOD, so you can catch up on that at a time of your choosing.
Wow. What's the link for that?
I believe. Well, I mean, you can. The VODs are on channel as well as on YouTube. You can follow and see all of that. I did not mean to make this into some sort of a plug. But yeah, let's talk a little bit more about games and designing, especially
Okay.
native representation in games. I mean, with exceptionals, there's a little bit of that, but
Yeah.
uh,
The state is bad. Obviously, this does definitely come up in the D&D discourse, but there's a lot of really bad coding in tabletop in general.
mhm.
But it's not a good feeling to see someone that's supposed to be representative of you constantly kind of like a half animal people, and I like
Yeah.
playing animal people. I mean,
Yeah.
and or described as savage, or just
Oh,
wearing like these
yeah.
weird mismatch uh just different. Again, we fall into the omni native with the totem poles and the teepees, despite those cultures being just
Very
different parts of
different.
different parts of the nation, not even touching. Not even the
Yeah.
same language groups.
Yes. Like not even in the same
Yeah.
uh climate region or something
Yeah,
like.
no, not at all. But there's that, and then there's the issues that like more contemporary games have,
Mhm.
or even sci-fi games, which we're looking at things like Shadowrun here, or again World of Darkness, where a lot of times they'll write indigenous response to colonialism as xenophobia,
Yeah.
or they'll have a very kind of 80s idea of what it means to be indigenous, and
What is
so
the 80s idea? I
um
wasn't born here, so I actually don't know much about
okay
culture.
okay so like in about like the mid 80s to the 90s, there was like a shift in indigenous culture, because I guess white people were like, oh, we did a bad actually.
My
um
bad.
yeah, my bad. But they so there was kind of like a re-examination of westerns,
Hmm.
and they were like, oh, the way we solve this is to make indigenous people um to make them sympathetic uh
Wait, sympathetic to white people or make them sympathetic to white people?
to white people.
Okay.
We're talking Dances with Wolves here.
Oh. I haven't watched the
Yeah.
movie, but I just have an inkling of what it's about.
It's fine, you're not missing much. Kevin Costner's there. He's wearing a lot of buckskin.
Oh,
He
the white
dances with a wolf.
savior,
Yeah, a lot of
the
that,
like the
or you
Last
have.
Mohican, the Last Samurai, those sort of movies.
Yeah, it's very much in that vein of, uh we we did a bad thing but we uplifted them, or here's like this, the mystic shaman here to give a white person some sort of indispensable wisdom that they will grow on. It is a lot of that sort of stuff. Or in the 80s, natives have just lost their way. They lost all their pride. That's why they have casinos and
It's
things.
up to the white person to make them more their culture again.
Yes, like, we value your culture more than you do. Don't you understand?
We're trying to save you from
Yeah.
yourselves.
Yeah, or just like, what happened to your warrior pride? Just just a lot of stuff like that, and Shadowrun falls into that a lot. Uh,
Okay.
uh, same with, again, World of Darkness. It's not great. Um, and there's but the good news is there's Own Voices media out there. There's a lot of there are games being made by Indigenous people.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's nice to see this, and it's not just in video game or in tabletop games. You're seeing it in video games and stuff now too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Idolonge, I believe is what it's called. It is a Indigenous developed fantasy game that's
Ooh.
very good. I'm definitely mutual with a few Indigenous designers. Dee Pennyway is a good one,
Mm-hmm.
but she doesn't really like her work to be categorized as Indigenous necessarily, which I think
Mm-hmm.
that's fair.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, like, but there are people out there still making games, and I think as we push for a more diverse uh, a kind of fantasy setting, uh, we we should definitely be supporting these sorts of games and these sorts of stories.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, for sure.
um, you know, uh, I I I think, like, one of the big things that I've definitely gotten out of it is, there's a difference between an Indigenous game and what outsiders expect out of an Indigenous game.
Yeah.
Because indigeneity doesn't need to be necessarily a fantasy steeped in indigenous, what's recognizable as indigenous things, especially by an outsider, because again, as we've discussed, uh, most of that is a construct by by outsiders. So the signals that are there to let white people know that this is an Indigenous game are not necessarily the same things that Indigenous people are going to respond to.
Yeah.
Um,
And just a quick note, when we
mhm.
refer to D, they actually use they them pronouns.
Thank you, thank you
Yeah.
for
So just a little
I
correction on our end so that we are not
thank
properly
you.
we are not misgendering them.
I appreciate that. I do not want to misgender them at all.
Okay, continue.
Okay. Um, I'm just saying that there is uh, there's a difference between that, and I think, like, what makes an Indigenous game comes from the core of the spirit of the game. What sort of things is it talking about? What sort of lessons does it have? Is it pulling from how is it pulling from my experiences and the that my culture in that way? I know uh, Exceptionals pulls a lot from the ideals of, like, community that I kind of grew up with, and what that is, and you are connected to uh, in a wild web, not only to the people around you, but people you don't know, people, you know, your environment, uh, and sometimes these aren't good relationships. Sometimes they're messy, but they're important, and there's something that you should be aware of and think about when you do something.
Yeah. So we had talked a little bit earlier about designing games with empathy. What does that look like for you?
Does I think that's always it's always kind of difficult to talk about because ultimately you are not going to be the one who decides whether or not you do this successfully.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be the world when you put it out into it. But ultimately, I think it comes down to listening and taking that time to like sit down and think about like what are these experiences like? What is how would that affect me? How does that how would that change how I interact with the world? And I think it's something that doesn't start at it starts with mechanics. And it starts even before that. You have to do it from the beginning. It has to be something that is in the very root of what you're making. It's not something that you can kind of like add in or get with enough people that you hire as like consultants.
Yeah.
It needs to be something that is communicated in your mechanics and how you talk about your world and how you play and the
Yeah.
behaviors that you're encouraging in your play.
Like how you said, instead of like a safe house or something like that, it's a base building,
Yeah,
and things like that, where it straight up removes that fortress feeling of like
right.
you're building a place to keep everyone out versus a place where you can be you.
And what's funny is that like I find like that's something that white players specifically have a hard time grasping as a concept as opposed to playing with people of color or people who have another form of marginalized identity. Like I definitely played with a lot of trans people who got it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I get the idea that you are not the default, that
Yeah.
you are not that
You're not a chosen one.
yeah, or you are you have to think about how others will react to you in some way.
Mm-hmm.
um I think like one of the biggest lessons I learned making exceptionals as far as like how to design with empathy is sometimes it's better not to tell someone how to do something, but to give them the
Right.
space to do it themselves. Like allow them to talk about their own experiences on their own terms.
Yeah.
And that's something I explicitly want to put in the game because like it's X-Men. I want to give you the chance to punch back against oppressors, but it's not something I want to like force on you either. If that's not something you want to engage with, uh you
Just
don't have to. You can have a story about like a squirrel got loosed in the cafe that we're using in the base and we're just trying to catch it.
so something very kind of like Hanabono and very like super light.
Yeah, I mean it's where you want to get into kind of it's what you want to put into it.
Yeah.
The stuff is there. It's omnipresent because like even if we don't want to necessarily engage with it fully, it's something that we are is always present in our lives.
Yeah.
But I again I want to give people the permission to uh engage with it on your own terms.
Yeah. So moving as we're getting close to the end of our hour, we're gonna move into
Mm-hmm.
something that is probably one of my favorite topics if anybody knows me, and
Uh-huh.
that's food.
Oh God, yes.
Uh,
Should I start pulling out all my cookbooks?
sure.
Okay, this isn't even all of them. This is just the stuff I have in my not in the kitchen right now. Oh, just we got uh last year's edition of The Joy of Cooking.
That's
Got
a
some
weighty
Betty Crocker going
volume.
on.
That's a weighty
Oh,
volume. I can
oh,
just
I think I don't hear you.
uh, I can still hear you.
Oh, that's on me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool.
Now, yeah.
Awesome.
I got oh salt, fat, acid, heat.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Yes,
So
I
what's your do you cook and what do you enjoy cooking?
okay. I like a lot of Tex-Mex and Asian street food.
Ooh, like what?
Yeah. Like I like making a lot of like the American kind of like uh buffet classics and stuff like that. Like I like making a teriyaki. That's
Mhm.
fun. I like doing that. But I also like engaging with Tex-Mex because so so much of what makes up like Tex-Mex and Southern food and and all of that is indigenous cooking.
Mhm.
It's something that's kind of been erased from the conversation. Like Southern food is largely a joint mix between Black people and indigenous people, and that is something that should be recognized more often. Uh,
For
I
sure.
am I am also big on chili is the quintessential indigenous dish, and we never get recognition for that. Especially is considering like how widely it's used in upper in like fancy cooking.
Chili?
Yeah, yeah,
I would never. It's one of those things where it's like chili to me seems like one of those comfort foods. It's hard for me to imagine it being fancy, but
yeah. But it is. It's something that you see like kind of like, oh, this is like a pre-course thing, or like
okay.
or it's something that we get before we get into the into like the entrees and all of that. But it's uh let's break down the components of chili here. It's beans, that's indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
Peppers, that's our stuff.
Yep.
High fat meats,
Mm-hmm.
and spices. It is it's an indigenous meal.
It is. Like I was doing research for like Desi food, and
Mhm.
it's blew my mind how many things that are so ubiquitous to Desi cuisine didn't are not native. Like
Yeah.
potatoes, every Desi person loves potatoes. That's South American.
Yes.
Chilies, that's also like the Americas. Tomatoes, also the Americas. Like
I food anthropology is wild and a great subject, which is where a lot of my love of cooking comes from.
that's
Uh,
same here, man. We could have conversations for hours.
yeah, it is, but I think like I like to talk about how indigenous people sciences were like city planning or urban planning. It was ecology. It was it was you know, if you look into just the sheer amount of work it took to make corn, it
Oh
would blow
yeah,
your mind.
especially that nixtamalization to make it
Yes.
make it nutrient dense and like palatable or
Yeah.
digestible. Sorry, I think because yeah, digestible. Just
Hmm.
all those things. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Our ancestors are amazing and we should recognize that. And that, you know, America is just such a wild land of food, because like not only do you have these influences, you have like all these immigrant cultures coming in, and you have like America's weird obsession with state fairs and fairs in general. Like, do you how much like food innovation came in like our junk food culture came specifically from world fairs?
I feel like world fairs are just a kind of like I don't know, dare to see how many things you can deep fry.
Yeah, I mean,
And
yeah,
then
but like,
take all those monstrosities, smush them together, and then deep fry them once more.
yeah, I mean, but that listen, we all owe apologies to Guy Fieri.
Yeah, we do. Okay, because we're actually getting close to the end,
Okay.
and also because Katie's in chat, I'm gonna ask you something that was brought over that started a little like food war on Twitter right
Uh-huh.
after.
Okay.
So hear me out. Pop
Hmm.
Tart, is that a dumpling?
Mm.
It's
No.
filling encased in dough.
It is. It's filling in queso dough. It is definitely a pastry, but it is not. But a dumpling implies a different sort of cooking method, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You would not find them in even the same section of the cookbook. Is my argument. Like they are ideologically similar, but they are categorically different.
Yes, dumplings are boiled. However, I have seen dumplings being treated in other ways.
Yeah,
Or
fried,
steamed.
steamed, yeah, all sorts of stuff. You're not gonna steam a Pop Tart.
Yeah, but you could fry a Pop Tart.
You could bring it back to the state fair.
But this is probably the last time I'm asking any guest whether
Uh-huh.
a Pop Tart is a dumpling. But I just felt like, to bring back to tie it in
Uh-huh.
from the previous episode.
Uh-huh.
So as we get close to the end, why don't you reintroduce yourself and where people can find you on the internet and any projects you'd like to um,
Okay.
highlight and boost?
Okay. Hi, I'm Gar Atkins, otherwise known as Sahoni to my friends, and you know what? That can include you. You can find me on Twitter at Sahoni_stuff. That's SAHONI_stuff, where I work as a game designer and podcaster. I'm currently around 41% done editing Exceptionals, which is a TTRPG and that is narrative focused and inspired by X-Men, but about the communities and spaces marginalized peoples make for themselves. The tagline is a game about community activism and kinetic I-beams. And I think the order of importance is in that order. But it is, you can also catch me on the weekly current events podcast, Barking Points Memo, where I'm a regular contributor and I guess barker, uh, where I talk about the news and have an anxiety attack, but also talk a lot about David Boreanaz. He just comes up. Uh, And you can also catch me on RPG Pals Club, where I play a dog boy of sorts who's a cleric of sorts, Dodger Kelly.
Nice.
Yes, he has a shovel and he's a very good boy. Invite me on to more podcasts. I want to be on more podcasts, guys.
Well,
I'm charming, kind of.
incredibly charming with no sarcasm whatsoever. You are an amazing being. All right.
Thank you.
So, before we wrap up, it's been 2 days since we've been affiliate. We're now affiliate on Twitch.
Oh, congrats!
Thanks! Which means that you can support us aside from following and watching and all the other wonderful free ways of help supporting us. You can now subscribe to us, give us bits, or if you have an Amazon Prime account, you can get subscribe to us for free.
And that right now while I'm on screen.
Oh, wow! Thank you. Every little bit counts. Okay, now I have to find something else for bit, but you know what I mean. So yeah, there's lots of ways to support us as the donate button, and we also have an emote, and which is our Huetop love, which you get, and I will have a better script for how to support us the next time we do stuff. But for now, next week is going to be Kahania, which is the Sarzamin campaign that I'm GMing. It's our second episode. See what our beautiful babies do at an auction. And also next Thursday, we're going to have another episode of Palette. And thank you so much, Sahoni, for subscribing. Whoa! I think we're pretty close to getting a third emote if we haven't already gotten it. Anyways, with that said, we are going to go raid a Nino playing Fire Emblem. So everybody get your
Heck
emotes
yeah.
and everything ready as we go say hello and raid
Let the
a
waifu
Nino.
wars commence.
Yes. I really want to get that game. Anyways, see y'all and tune in next week. Bye!